Hi there. Today we're going to be talking about biopsychology and how certain biopsychological concepts can help us understand why we prefer certain foods as well as why we avoid certain foods. So everyone has a food preference, a type of taste that they would prefer to eat if given the choice among multiple foods. And as humans, the foods that we tend to prefer are the ones that taste sweet, fatty, or salty. So you can see here this woman is clearly preferring the croissant to the salad. I would argue that might cover all three of these tastes. It might be sweet, maybe it's a chocolate croissant. It's certainly fatty with all the butter that's baked into the crispy crust. And maybe there's some salt sprinkled on top or baked into it. So these are the tastes that we really enjoy. But why? Usually when someone is asked that question, they will just respond, well, it tastes good. And it does taste good, but taste really is subjective. It's a sort of emotional or sensory experience. We all prefer these same foods. Why is that? And so evolutionary psychologists offer a reason for why this might be. It all has to do with calories and evolutionary psychology. So if you think about it in terms of our ancestors were hunters, gatherers, foragers, and the foods that were highest in calories tended to have these flavors, sweet, fatty, salty. And what that means is that people who preferred these tastes, who preferred sweet tastes, tended to get more calories. Of course, if you get more calories in a time of famine, you might be the one that survives. You might live on to pass your genes on to the next generation. So having a taste for sweet or fatty, maybe there's animal carcasses and you enjoy the fattier parts of it. All of those things might provide an evolutionary advantage, which is one reason why we might see it in ourselves today. Of course, we live in a very different environment. So our foraging looks more like this. We have endless supply of food. And so what was advantageous to our ancestors may actually have a disadvantage for us. So we got those genes that made us prefer sweet, fatty, and salty food, but we don't necessarily need them. In fact, for us, it may make us gain weight. It may make us eat more. It may make us unhealthy. And so this is sort of the paradox of evolution, is it's not necessarily what's good for us now, but it was what was good for our ancestors that made them pass those genes down to us. Our preferences for food can also be influenced by our experience or our upbringing. So sometimes emotional stimuli can influence what we enjoy in food. And of course, you can think about this as comfort food. We all have those comfort foods that kind of make us feel like we're at home, make us feel loved and comfortable. This can happen through emotional reinforcement or associating food with a positive experience or event. And we can probably think of a lot of different ways that you could associate food with happiness. So you might think about a birthday cake. So a birthday cake is usually something you eat, a couple times a year. Usually there's a big exciting event that's going on at the same time. Everyone's happy. It's usually all the attention is on you. Now, that might make you enjoy birthday cake more. Of course, some might say, well, do we really need to associate emotional stimuli with birthday cake? It's pretty good on its own. And that's true. So there's probably other foods that make a little bit more sense in terms of we like them because of the events we associate with them. And so Thanksgiving is a good example of something like this. So there's probably foods that are sort of traditional to you at Thanksgiving that maybe if you think about it aren't necessarily the most appealing otherwise. So maybe you love grandma's green bean casserole, but you really don't like eating vegetables most of the time. Or maybe you love cranberry sauce, but you would never think of opening a jar of cranberry sauce during the year. But something about those elicits these positive, happy memories that make you enjoy that food. Now, in addition to food preferences, you might also be adverse to a food. So food aversion is an example of this. Sometimes there is something known as conditioned taste aversion, which is actually a special type of conditioning that can happen in relationship to food. And when this happens is usually when you get sick after eating a particular food. And when that happens, you will tend to avoid that food in the future. So I remember one time I was eating liver as a, I don't know, around 10-year-old. And my mother had made it and she wanted me to eat it. And I got sick. I got sick at the table. I vomited at the table. And I still remember that experience. It was a pretty emotional experience because it's not particularly enjoyable to vomit at the dinner table. But also, just the fact that it made me sick means that I don't think I've had liver since that time when I was 10 years old. It was enough of an experience to make me stay away from it forever. Now, this is, like I said, a type of conditioning, specifically a type of classical conditioning. So if you think back to the classic Pavlov's dogs experience, where you're associating a stimuli with a response. Now, there's a couple differences between these types of conditioning. So in conditioned taste aversion, the interesting thing is that it only takes one time to occur. So in normal classical conditioning, you have to pair the stimuli repeatedly in order to learn. But in conditioned taste aversion, it only needs to happen one time. Another difference is that several hours may actually pass between the exposure or eating the food and the outcome. And that's different from traditional classical conditioning as well. In classical conditioning, usually the associations are strongest when the stimuli are paired very closely together. But of course, our bodies tend to know that food and sickness are associated. So even if those aren't directly lined up, like my experience with getting sick right at the dinner table with the liver, if you get sick hours later, you might avoid that food for years. And the interesting thing is that you don't even necessarily have to have a recollection of this specific event. It's a natural thing that happens where we learn to avoid a certain taste because of an event that happened in our past. So I'll pass the question off to you. What about you? Do you prefer foods that are salty, sweet, or fatty? Maybe you prefer foods that are all three. Do you have any happy memories that shape your food preferences? Are there specific foods that you associate with positive memories of your childhood or even of your adulthood? And do you have any negative experiences that might influence the foods that you don't like? Think about all these things, and that will help you understand a little bit more about our preferences and our aversions when it comes to food. I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.